it's kind of a double-edged sword sometimes, because once we get into a routine, we're experiencing the benefits and things like that. But sometimes one of the things that can keep us doing it is that we feel bad if we don't.
This is By Joyan Season 2. I'm your host, Joyan Chan, and every Wednesday we bring you inspiring stories, powerful message, and fun conversations with me and my special guests and friends, and it's my personal mission to empower you to live and lead a life with joy. This podcast is for you if you're looking for more joy, courage, passion, and purpose in your life. Now let's dive into today's episode and get ready to laugh, learn, and live your life to the fullest. Our guest today is a clinical psychologist who helps people build sustainable self-care without burnout or guilt. He focuses on why motivation fades and why people struggle to stay consistent, and how simple structure rather than perfection supports mental and physical well-being. And he's here today to help you feel better first so change becomes possible. So ladies and gentlemen, tell me in welcoming the co-creator of our Primer 5, a framework centered on 5 foundational areas of health, the one and only Dr. Matthew Campbell. Welcome to the show, Matthew. Good morning.
Thank you for having me.
Let's establish the problem. Why do you think so many people struggle to stay consistent with self-care even when they know what to do?
Well, at the most basic level, I think it comes down to living in a world that our bodies weren't necessarily made for. Living in a world that provides so many choices, so many things that we can do that can take us away from those things that are so basic, those that our ancestors had no choice to do, the way that our bodies were made. And it's difficult because it's constant decision making, constant choices that we have to make in order to take care of these very basic necessary things. And so again, I think that it's much more challenging for us than ever before. Technology is wonderful and fun, but ultimately it makes the basic taking care of ourselves much more challenging.
Yeah. So when you talk about the basic and the framework, the Primer 5, you talk about, correct me if I'm wrong, right? This is based on my research. Sunlight, movement, social connections, and consumption, and the other one are kind of sleep, right?
Sleep.
So yeah. So if someone, a listener listening to this right now, feels emotionally drained, what is the one foundational behavior that should stabilize first, and why?
Well, I think that it really is dependent upon the person. I think that and oftentimes, unfortunately, it's not just one. And we can get to this at any time, but the numbers are really overwhelming. The numbers in terms of areas of difficulty, and it's often more than one that we're struggling with, and the numbers would certainly suggest that, and it certainly fits with my clinical practice. But I think that we really need to identify which one. I think sometimes it's even different stages of life, certain areas that we go over here are more challenging.
So how do we know then, on a personal level, how do I know which area should I focus on first?
Right. Well, I think sometimes if we look at what the numbers are, maybe like for example, sleep. If I'm getting, if I'm far outside of 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night, okay, well that's problematic. Or if I have very little time where I'm with other people or connected to other people, then that may be a problem. Or if I'm finding myself just on screens all the time, and that I can't do anything else without checking my phone. These kind of things can indicate, can let us know that is probably an area to really focus upon.
Right. And so let's talk about why they are so important. Like, so why they are so powerful for our emotional well-being or emotional regulation.
Absolutely, taking care of that nervous system, it's so important. And we know, I mentioned sleep again. We know sleep is just profoundly important in terms of being able to handle our emotions throughout the day, being able to be focused, be at our best in terms of focus and effort, and dealing, not having to deal with that fatigue throughout the day. Sunlight, goodness, sunlight, our mood is so impacted by getting sunlight. It really helps actually with that sleep cycle if we can get morning sunlight. Connection with others, that is something that really helps with mood as well. Not feeling isolated, feeling connected, that really can improve how we're feeling, our contentment. Consumption is a broad category. It's physical and mental consumption. Really, anxiety can really be elevated by mentally what we consume. And that's really just like anything. It's your fuel, and what fuel source are you using in that regard. And of course, exercise or movement. A lot of times it's better to focus on movement than necessarily exercise, because really what we're trying to do is move around to do what our bodies were made to do. And that doesn't mean an extreme exercise regimen. In fact, that's often, if we're kind of starting from the couch, so to speak, that's really not necessarily going to be the best approach. But movement, exercise is found in terms of effect on our mood to be equivalent to an antidepressant. Similar effects. And that doesn't mean, of course, if people are on that they should stop, but it just shows how significant and impactful it is that we move our bodies. First of all, we know these things. These are not, these aren't things that can be inherently motivating, because they're things that we're already familiar with. I think that that's one thing that makes it challenging as well. And I think that our lives so often get in the way in terms of our activities, our things that are that we feel like it's just I'll do it later, or that doesn't, even sometimes I don't need to do that. Sometimes we'll feel like, well, I'm fine with 4 hours of sleep or 5 hours of sleep and things like that, because it's what we're accustomed to. So that's what we know. We know that we have to take in a great deal of caffeine. That's what we're familiar with. So I think that sometimes it's what we know. I think sometimes it's a busy schedule. And then, as you said, I think sometimes it's, where do I start, can be a challenge.
Yeah. And often why people stay on the couch, or, they don't exercise, they don't move around, is because they lack motivation. Like, or at least that's what they tell themselves, right? I need
Right.
motivation to start going to the gym, to start going out, right? Hang out with friends and things like that. But you also talk about the difference between motivation and structure. And you talk about structure is more important than motivation. So what do you mean by that?
The most important parts for us to recognize and to focus on is that when we're at our healthiest, our behavior, our actions are what leads to the way we feel. That in terms of recognizing and being intentional with the activities that we engage in, and then the feelings can follow. But as you said, with motivation, so often we're waiting to feel like doing something. We're waiting that, okay, now I want to do this. I want to exercise. I want to sleep. I want to get outside and things like that. And that is going to be a roadblock for us, because it's wonderful when we feel like doing it, but especially when we're starting something, a lot of times it takes that structure of this. Okay, this is what I'm going to do, and this is going to be my routine. I'm going to start with reasonable short-term goals, for myself. I'm not trying to start at my goal. My ultimate long-term goal, that is not what I need to start with. I need to start with what's the next step? How can I improve this? But if we do wait to feel like it, we're probably going to be waiting a very, very long time. For example, the easiest example, I think, for many of us are New Year's resolutions. It's something that so many of us have experience with that it's almost like a joke in many ways, the New Year's resolution, because, the numbers suggest, 80-90% of them are done
Yeah.
after a few weeks. So what's happening? That's an example of this. I start my New Year's resolution. It's usually going to be something health related, exercise, what I'm eating, things like this. And I'm excited initially. This is going to be something I'm going to do. And here is this clear point. It's going to be the beginning of the year and it's going to be, fantastic. And so I have this excitement initially, which is great. I mean, that's wonderful that we can get that initial push that way. A lot of times that's an important, helpful part of it. But what then happens is we're relying on feeling like it by being motivated, being excited. And then, of course, after a week, 2 weeks, our life is happening. We don't feel like doing it. Let's say we're trying to exercise. Maybe we do it in the morning. We're tired when we wake up and we think, I'll do that tomorrow. I'm just tired today. And then we find those continue to stack on each other. It's okay to have a slip. It's normal. It's natural, but it's difficult, sometimes because those slips, people start thinking, oh well, that's not working. But again, we're relying on wanting to and excitement, and that it's not going to be sustained for us.
So if we don't rely on motivation, what should we rely on instead to keep our habits sustainable?
Well, I think a lot of times that excitement and motivation can start it, and that's wonderful, and that's really, really helpful. I think that one of the best things that we can do is to set goals for ourselves. It's difficult to stay motivated for something that is really far in the future. I've had people in my office, like sometimes parents, who, when I talk to them about behavior change, or behavior management techniques for their kids, they will have this really, really long term goal. And it'll be, okay, I want you to get A's, for this school year. And they'll come up. I remember one in particular, and the idea was, this child was going to get a phone, at the end of the year if they got all A's. And that's a wonderful long term goal. But if we're relying on that to keep someone motivated for that long of a period of time, it's not going to work. Breaking things up into shorter term goals, that this is where I would like to be in a week. This is what I would like to be doing. I would like to be walking for 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes by the end of the week. I would like to be doing that every day, or I would like to be going to bed at, let's say, 10 p.m., 9 p.m. I'd like to do that this week. And then I start stacking those. And the nice thing about it is those short-term successes, can start creating some momentum, which is very helpful.
Yeah. So yeah, let's you talk about New Year's resolution and yeah, and encourage people who are listening to ask themselves if they are still following through, on their goals that set in the at the beginning of the year, because now it's already mid-Feb. And so can you explain why trying to change everything at once? Because again, when we set goals, we often set goals in all areas of our life. Like I want a partner, I want a healthy relationship, I want to start exercising, I want to eat healthy, I want to sleep better, right? I want to have a successful career, like all these things that we want out of life. And we're trying to set goals and trying to achieve them all at once. So can you explain why trying to change everything at once usually backfires from a psychological perspective?
Well, I think from, just the straightforward aspect of it is it's just too much. It's too much because I think a lot of times when we're looking at an area to change, we have to recognize, okay, what might be leading to this difficulty for me? And so we're kind of looking at what we call the function of behavior, because behavior is not random. We're doing what we're doing. There's going to be some reason for it and things like that. If I'm trying to do that for five different things, that is a lot of work to be doing. And ultimately, that probably is going to start impacting other areas of my life. And we're probably just going to, wrap it up to something I can't do. That doesn't work for me because we're trying to do too many things at once. Or again, we're so focused on the goal, ultimately where we want to be, that it feels like a failure so quickly. You mentioned one of the things you mentioned, a partner, finding a partner. And I think a lot of times when I've worked with people in that regard, it's like the goal, the focus is, okay, well, dating someone, something like that. That's the goal, and so it's like I want that immediately. Well, sometimes what we need to do is we just need to start putting ourselves in positions where we may be able to meet someone, that setting the table for success. And so it's something that a lot of times, if we can start recognizing, okay, what can help get me there, what makes my success in that regard more likely, that's something that we can do. But too many things at once is overwhelming. It doesn't allow us to kind of focus on what may be challenging in one particular area. And now that's not to say that we can't do things that help us in multiple areas. Sometimes we can stack things. We can cluster things together. The easiest example for me, and the one I've seen the most, is perhaps finding a friend that we walk every morning. Okay. Well, the beauty of that is all of a sudden we're getting outside, we're moving our bodies, and we're connected. We're having a conversation with someone. Now, that can be really useful, and that's something that can take care of several of these things. But in general, especially if it's separate activities, it's just going to be too much. It's just going to be too much, and puts us in that position where we think we can't do that. That's just not for me. We start being self-critical. Oh, I'm not good at that. I don't have discipline. I don't have this. And we start telling these stories about ourselves. And the reality is we're just not setting ourselves up for success.
Yeah. And you're so right. I really love the example of just having a friend to work out together in the morning, right? You get sunlight, you get social connection, you get movement. Like that's just beautiful.
About that is that there's an aspect too of accountability,
Mm.
because sometimes, we always hear about workout, or we often hear about workout partners and things like that. If I'm doing this kind of activity with someone else, then all of a sudden we kind of have this accountability for one another. Sometimes the difficulty in doing things is that we are the only one we're accountable for, or to. And so that makes it more challenging. In general, I find with all sorts of things, I find for myself, one of my challenges in my clinical work is I went, by the time you're finished with your degree, it's been 22, 24 years when you think of starting in kindergarten and all the way through graduate school. It's been 22, 24 years that I've been getting constant feedback from others. And then now all of a sudden, I am the one who needs to do these things, and I am the one who needs to see, like, how can I see how well I'm doing at these things, and so on and so forth. And sometimes that internal, when we have to rely on ourselves to be accountable to, it's more challenging. So again, having someone we're working on things with can be really helpful.
Yeah, I agree. Having an accountability partner, it's not just in exercise, right? In your career or in your business, if you're starting one, right? Having someone just to do things together with is so powerful. Now, I wanted to ask, and earlier you mentioned about briefly the function of behavior. Like you talk about for every behavior, it serves a purpose, right? That's how I understand it. I find that very interesting. So can you give us an example of a behavior and how, a bad habit, for example, like someone is just sitting on the couch, watching Netflix all day long. Like what does it serve them? Like what is the function of the behavior?
Well, honestly, one time, some of the time, with the example that you're giving, is we're trying to distract ourselves. We're trying to distract ourselves to have something else to focus on. And so with that, the function is distraction. The function is getting away from something else that may be bothering us, or the function may be, well, distraction. Maybe it's distraction from, I'm not with other people. I'm not doing things. There are things in my life that I'm not doing, and it bothers me. So I have these shows to watch. I have these, things to binge, and so on and so forth. And so that can be a function, is in that way distraction, and as opposed to, okay, well, what might I be able to do about this? But I also want to mention, our goal is not perfection. The idea of perfection with these things is so difficult, because that's really not attainable. There's nothing that we can be perfect with. Hey, listen, if I have a day where I spend a lot of time watching Netflix and things like that, okay, well, that's what I did today. I don't need to beat myself up. I don't need to talk negatively about myself and do things like that. That's just part of being a human. We're going
Mm.
to have those days, and that's okay. Let's not tell ourselves a story about us, that's not really fair, or even recognizing our humanity.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, thanks for being human, and it's not a bad thing to watch Netflix. I just want to make that clear. The reason why I gave the example is because someone told me that the reason why she watches Netflix or shows and after work is because she finds that that's the only thing that she enjoys doing. I mean, right? And but again, if you have goals in life, if your goal is to exercise more, meet friends, have a partner, but what you're doing is staying at home and watching Netflix, it's not gonna help you to achieve the goal, right? So I think we have to establish that first. Like, what is your goal? Are you doing anything to achieve that, right? Um, you also talk about protecting behaviors rather than adding more. So what does that look like in our day-to-day life?
Well, a lot of it is about strengthening, behaviors, and strengthening things that we're doing, to create that solid foundation. It's one of the things, is that once we can create that routine, routine structure, these are things that sometimes we don't like, because we want to have freedom and choices, which of course we like, and that's a wonderful thing. But sometimes, what we do is that, you said, we're trying to change too many things at once, but also we're not allowing ourselves to have a structure and a routine, and therefore everything's a constant choice. It's a constant choice. Do I want to do this? Do I want to do that? And usually that's where we're going to get into that emotionally driven behavior, and it makes healthy behaviors much more difficult. But when it's a routine, sometimes what can happen, like for example with exercise, it's kind of a double-edged sword sometimes, because once we get into a routine, we're experiencing the benefits and things like that. But sometimes one of the things that can keep us doing it is that we feel bad if we don't, and so it's both, we feel good from doing it, but then also we're thinking, oh man, I didn't do that today, right? And so that can push us in that direction too. But that's once it's strengthened, once it becomes a habit and a routine.
Yeah. So how do we strengthen a behavior? Like, can you give us an example? Any example would do.
Well, I think that, strengthening behaviors, a lot of times, has to do with those goals. It has to do with something that we are consistently trying to do. that we're consistently setting those short-term goals, and so we're adding on it, and then it becomes habit. It becomes kind of part of what we do. For example, one of the examples that I'll often give, I walk my dogs every morning. You and I are speaking here in the early morning where I live, and I've walked my dogs. I got up earlier today than normal, but that's my routine. That's what I do. And how did it begin? It began because I love my dogs and I enjoy that time, that makes them happy. I get some exercise, things like that. So that's how it started. And then it started becoming something where that alarm goes off and my legs are getting thrown over the bed, on feet on the floor, and I start moving. But it's become part of my routine. It's something that I do. I don't think about it. I don't ask myself every morning, do I feel like doing this? Because the answer a lot of times would be no. But it has become routine. And also the thing that's helpful with that is that, my dogs will let me know if they haven't walked. They will, they're going to be, so they create some accountability in and of themselves for me, to do so. But it really began, had some excitement, with it, which is great. And that often is what's going to start us down that path. But then it became routine. And now it's a very strong thing in my life to get out and do that.
Yeah. So how about changing a routine? I can give you a real example, like my own example, right? Because I'm recording podcasts with people from the other side of the world. I often go to bed quite late,
Right.
usually it's past midnight. And so I sleep, I go to bed late, I wake up late, and I don't want this routine, right? It makes me tired, it makes me hard to focus. I don't feel like doing anything, right? But still I have to do the work. So I really don't like this routine. But it has become a routine because of the work, the nature of the work, the podcast, things like that. So how do I change a routine? I think it's more difficult than changing a habit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so let's look at what you're saying though from and incorporating or going back to some of these things. So to me, the challenge that I hear you saying is that from a functional point of view, this work that you're doing with your show, with your podcast is very important to you.
Yep.
And so it so happens that since you are doing these with people, like myself, which, from what we talked about, I'm 14 hours
Yes.
behind you, and so it does create a challenge in this regard. And so I think that a lot of it is for you in this situation or this example, we need to ask ourselves is that ideally you would like to have a more traditional sleep pattern and sleep cycle. You would like to be getting to bed, you said midnight. Maybe you'd like to be getting to bed at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the evening. But then we need to ask ourselves, okay, the reason that I'm doing this is because of this work. Is there another way that I can do this? Is there a feasible way for me to do this? And maybe there's not. Maybe at this point in time, there's not. So then we have the acceptance of, okay, if I can't do that, am I getting, whatever works for you? Usually it's going to be 7 to 9 hours. Am I getting that? I would love for it to be different. But sometimes we have to adapt to our lives and we can't have it just like we would like it. But as long as we're meeting the basics, we're in, those basic needs and levels, it'll be okay.
Yep. All right. Thanks for that. Um, Now, if someone listening feels discouraged because they have failed their New Year's resolution, or self improvement or changing a habit before, what would you want them to understand today, based on everything we talked about?
So much of it, of our change, our behavior change, involves two parts are really essential. First is understanding, right? First is understanding different things about it. And the second is then getting after it and let's do something different and let's create some change. And so I think that one of the most important things in terms of the understanding is that even though these things are basic, even though these are things that we were taught early on and that we know, they are challenging to do. They are challenging to do, and to appreciate that fact. And so, our bodies came to be the way that they are at a time where our ancestors had to do these things. They had to. They didn't live in climate controlled environments. They were outside. They had to move to eat. They had to move their bodies to eat. They didn't have the choice of going to a fast food restaurant, and that short term thing. They didn't have these choices. We do. And that makes it more challenging. We have so many easy buttons
Yeah.
that are very short term in nature, and we are kind of wired for the short term, maximize pleasure, minimize pain. And we have so many of these choices that I think we need to appreciate. It's difficult. Now, just because it's difficult doesn't mean that it's not important to address and to try to get after. And so it begins with the understanding. Don't get into that thing where, oh, I'm just not a disciplined person. I'm not this, I'm not that. I can't do that because of some negative characteristic about ourselves. No, it's challenging. And there are areas of our life where we will have what we call discipline, what we call the more positive traits. But this is difficult. So then we do it. And then it's great to identify an area what is one area that either I'd like to work on or I see maybe the most, impactful to me. And then I'm going to focus on that one. And that's like the workbook is that it's five weeks. We're working on each one of these. We work on this one this week and this one this week. The idea is, let's work on it to make sure we're taking care of that. We're trying to start a habit and a routine and not doing it all at once.
Love that. You have shared a lot of practical tips and tools today. Now, lastly, is there anything that you really want to talk about? Perhaps I didn't ask you or didn't let you.
One of the things that I would want to mention and impart is I think that whatever we do, whatever we're trying to work on for ourselves, one of the observations that I've had in my work over the years is that when people are focused on self-help, in general, self-help books, self-help, a variety of things, one of the things that can happen is they focus on this approach, and then they focus on this approach, or they read this book, or they do this thing. And, I kind of think to myself sometimes, people probably have, when we look at folks, they have over 20 self help books or none at all. It's either one or the other. But the people who are really trying to help themselves and focus on themselves, sometimes what can happen is it's a really interesting idea that they read. And that's super interesting. What is often missing is implementing it,
Yeah.
is trying to really, okay, this, I'm going to try to focus on this thing, this approach. And so it becomes more of ideas, maybe dinner table conversation, as opposed to applying it. And when I was putting this together over the years, what I've done, is I would work with people and I would find these really common human struggles that we have that so many of us struggle with. And John, I had page after page. I mean, I looked the other day just because I was curious, and I had over 5 pages of single line things that I would put with a brief description. But when I was thinking about, okay, what would I write about? I decided what I decided, not because it was the catchiest at all or anything like that, but it's the thing that had the most impact on people in my experience in my career. But regardless of what we're trying to do, these self-help approaches, all of them have good things to say. All of them that I've come across have good things to say and encourage. So I would really, more than anything, I guess I would want to, encourage people to put things in motion, to really help themselves to get out of the idea phase and into applying different approaches. or identifying an approach, and then we try to get after it and help us.
Yeah, you're so right. And it's not just books like this thing. I mean, just think about this podcast, right? Look at what we are doing. I love podcasts because I listen to podcasts. And we get these ideas. I learn so
Yeah.
many ideas from all my guests. And am I implementing them? Yeah, I would love to. But again, so since we are on this topic, what would you want my listeners, people who are listening to this? Yeah, I mean, it's a great idea to change your habit, change your behavior. What is the practical, realistic next step you want them to take after they listen to this episode?
What I would love for them to do, what I would love for them to do is spend a week where you write down each day. At the end of the day, what we do is we write down how much time was I outside? How many minutes, maybe hours in that day was I outside? How long did I sleep last night? Um, how many people, if any, did I have a meaningful conversation, a connected conversation where there was a back and a forth, caring for each other, this type of thing. How often did I move today? How many minutes did I move today? How much time did I spend on a screen today? How many of my meals were healthy or clean, came from the earth? And just record that. Just become intentional because, the research shows us that recording these kind of things in and of themselves can help with behavior change. But then
Wow.
after a week, let's look at those. Let's look at those and see if there's probably going to be one or two or more that we're thinking, okay, I could probably do better with that. Pick one, create a goal, ideally short-term goals to build upon, and then let's work on it.
Thank you for that so much. Yeah, thank you so much again for your time and for your generous sharing. Now, tell my people where they can find you and connect with you. And since we are in different countries, do you by any chance do work online with people? Because I have listeners like from all over the world. Like, so where can people connect with you?
I have a website, our Primal Five with the number five, our primal5.com. And so on that site, we have, there's access where you can click a link to purchase the book. You can sign up for a newsletter. There's information on the ideas behind our Primal Five approach. We're on Instagram, our Primal Five. I have a LinkedIn page under my name, Matthew Campbell. And so there are some different ways like that they can connect and we can, hopefully follow up and get moving on these things for folks.
Perfect. Yes, I will put all your links in the show note below. And guys, thank you so much for joining and listening to this conversation. Again, listening to a podcast that helps you grow and learn is also a form of self-care. Don't forget to like and subscribe and reach out to Matthew and thank him for coming to our show today. I will always leave you the same way as I leave you in every other episode. Show up, the world needs you and you need you. Thanks for listening, and I wish you all a joyful and amazing day ahead. Thank you again for tuning into Find Joy Joyan podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, take a screenshot and share it on your IG story and tag findjoyjoyan_podcast so I know you are listening. And leave us a positive review on Apple Podcasts if you haven't already done so. And remember to hit the subscribe button whether you are listening on Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, or any of your other favorite platforms. If you love what we are doing and want to become one of our sponsors, you can send me a DM to connect. And thanks for being here. I will see you soon in the next episode.